Thirdly, Konstantina Vasiliki, Yakubu, and Sofia Damianidou are going to present their work, which is called Rehousing Again. And as last, the presentation by Patrick Weber and Sabine Storp is going to be listened, which is called Playroom Play. So we begin with Silverstone.
Good afternoon. My name is Sally Stone and I'm the Director of the College of Continuity in Architecture at the Manchester School of Architecture. The MSA is a joint school and it's situated within both the University of Manchester and the Manchester Metropolitan University. The College of Continuity in Architecture was established in 1994. And it focuses upon the sustainable design of new buildings and public spaces in the historic city and interventions within the existing structures. We believe that one of the most pressing concerns for today's society is how we engage with the urban situation in an environmentally friendly and sympathetic manner. The pursuit of strategies for carbon neutral buildings combined with issues of sustainability and heritage is central to all forms of architectural practice, research and education. I personally have published a number of books on this and written quite widely on the subject of this and building reuse. But today I'd like to talk to you about a subject that's not completely unconnected with this. I'd like to discuss the consequences that technology can have upon the nature of home life. Over the last 30 years, radical changes in work-life patterns have forced massive adjustments to the manner in which the home is occupied. It is now the norm to have a computer at home. In fact, most first and second world societies, it's almost expected. It has become customary to spend long hours at the home computer, reading, writing and researching, that is, obtaining and disseminating information. The massive advances that technology has brought in the 21st century means that we are rarely in a position where we're not in contact with other people and never far from a situation where we can access information. The need to save energy and time combined with the advent of advanced wireless technology and the reduction in the size of necessary equipment means that at last telecommuting is being seen as a viable alternative to the daily commute. The completion of work at home, or even working from home for 1 or 2 days per week, is not an uncommon event. But this movement of office work to the home has an impact upon the quality of the domestic environment. Frank Duffy sort of predicted this in his seminal publication of 1997, The New Office. Here he set out his thoughts upon the evolution of the home office environment from one with a traditional hierarchy, individual offices and a very vertical line of communication, to a sleek, slippery series of spaces, each with a vastly different character and a much more liberal and intuitive and spontaneous communication system. Duffy created a taxonomy of spaces built not upon personality and position, but upon task, assignment and undertaking. In his book, The New Office, Duffy compares the two types of organisation before proposing a design logic for the contemporary office environment. He argues that the massive changes that technology has wrought means that the type of work completed has also radically changed, and therefore, so has the space in which it is completed. As the environment of the office becomes less solitary and more plural, so the balance between space given over to individual workstations and that allocated to group activities has rapidly shifted. Work has become varied and therefore could be broken, according to Duffy, into 4 different organisational types. Individual processes, that he called the hive, group processes, the den, transactional knowledge, the club, and concentrated study, this he called the cell. And that offices could be organised according to the process that occurred with them, rather than by the hierarchy of the personnel. Workers would no longer have a dedicated space, but would simply use the space most suitable for the task that they were completing. He used the analogies to come up with appropriate names for the different space, and thus the hive It's characterised by individual and routine process work that has low levels of interaction and autonomy. A call centre would be typical of this type of space. The den is a space for group work and is suitable for highly interactive, often noisy work, such as team brainstorming events. The club is a space that encourages intimate interaction in a quiet, often private environment. An example of this type of work would be a confidential meeting. And the fourth and final category is the cell. This is a space for concentrated individual study that needs little or no interaction or interruption. He described the scenario of the occasional autonomous and sporadic work in a closed environment. The cell is a space that need not even be situated within the office environment. At the end of the 20th century, Frank Duffy identified this space as possibly being a home. By the second decade of the 21st, it definitely is a viable option. The home does provide all of the conditions necessary for cell working. Digital technology has ensured that all office workers have access to all of the information that they need while still within the privacy of their own home. In fact, I would contest that technology has now allowed us to move much further than that. It is now possible to complete all activities that would normally be completed in the office at home. All of the different environments described by Duffy are freely available within the normal home. The environment of the office is there, situated within the domestic space. I'd like to illustrate this with an example from my own family's environment. For one reason and another, my 13-year-old son now lives some 50 miles from his best friend. They text often and certainly communicate on Facebook. I take this on trust because to look at a teenage boy's Facebook page would be beyond the pale. However, on many evenings they use Skype or FaceTime to communicate with each other. This isn't because they have anything important to discuss, it's much more about the company. They complete their individual homework together, they drink cocoa before bed, and they even jam along with their guitars to the same piece of music. It's almost like having a friend in the room with you. It's very simple but effective acceptance of what this type of technology can bring. Recently, I was talking to my son when this disconnected voice wished me a good evening. I bent over towards the screen to greet the best friend, whose image occupied the whole screen. Behind him was a mirror, and reflected in the mirror was obviously his back and the computer. And on his screen was an image of me, and for a fleeting moment, I could see myself reflected in the mirror of a bedroom some 50 miles away from where I was standing. I was shocked to see my real-time presence in a place so far away. Intellectually, I knew that it was a mere physical image. But yet this whole process proved that physical distance was no longer an obstacle in the way of real-time visual and oral relationships. It was at this point that I realised how video conferencing technology could bring everyone together in an intimate and personal way. The children had embraced the technology for their own purposes. They had no reservations or qualms about using it. Neither did they respect its limitations. I was discussing this face-to-face with the best friend's father, who admitted that when he calls his own son downstairs for dinner, he often feels very guilty about not only leaving my son on his own in the room, but also closing the door on him. So real was the feeling of togetherness that he had trouble disengaging a digital image from the reality of the situation. This small example illustrates the fact that digital technology allows us to feel together even when alone. It allows us to build social networks with people we've never physically met. It allows us to conduct meetings, have impromptu chats, confidential discussions, as well as individual and concentrated study from the security of our own living space. But surely, the home and the office are fundamentally different. The home has to be adaptable for a number of different activities and situations. It has evolved far from the notion of mere shelter to encompass all the different aspects of family life. The majority of homes are fairly small. The average family lives in a far more intimate way than would ever be acceptable in the office situation. It is normal for different members of the family unit to be carrying out different tasks immediately next to each other, and digital and wireless technology has augmented this situation. For many years, the family members were dispersed around the house, but wireless technology has once again encouraged a sort of comradeship. Other breakthroughs in technology mean that machines are smaller, not so much not big, but they're flat, and this means they need less room. So, whether it is listening to music, watching iPlayer, eating dinner, sewing, completing homework, this hub or kitchen table around which the family members can circulate allows the type of interaction that existed before technology really took over the world. The advent of wireless technology, combined with a reduction in the size of the technological equipment, has enabled the user to reclaim the surface of the table. No longer is it cluttered with cables, plugs and massive machines. It can now be arranged with objects that matter, books, pictures and artifacts that interest and stimulate thought. Interaction and productivity. Ironically, this is a concept that has moved from the domestic environment into the office interior. When the Borelec brothers were approached by Vitra to develop a range of office furniture for the 21st century, they declared that their aim was to despecify furniture, create multitask products. They felt the manner in which furniture was designed was too prescriptive. It only allowed people to work in one particular way. It didn't encourage creativity, lateral thinking or serendipity. So they developed a product they described as the common table, one that would allow people to communicate and to complete big communal work. They started with the very old concept of the big family table, at which everyone sat and everything happened. But this situation does lead us to question the difference between work and home. Frank Duffy, I think you've really underestimated the seriousness of this situation. And I suppose the most appropriate question to ask at this moment is, can it be a good thing? Is it possible to mix so completely the office and the home? Completing work at home does have an impact upon the quality of the home. Working does, after all, take up physical space. Wireless technology and portable machinery have reduced the size and removed the need for cables. But still, any work has to be completed somewhere. The design of an office has regulations that control the level of light, temperature and space. The home doesn't. The domestic dwelling often has small windows, and spending too long within a small, badly lit space can have a detrimental effect upon the body and the spirit. The home doesn't usually contain ergonomically designed office furniture, so the employee may end up spending too long crouched or sprawled over a laptop in an uncomfortable or unsuitable position. But possibly one of the most detrimental effects of working at home is not knowing when to stop. When should the employee turn off the computer and the mobile phone and return to domestic life? It is common for the teleworker to continue to monitor communications long after official hours are over. It is an extraordinary thing, and we've all witnessed this, that many people, when using mobile technology, become unaware of their surroundings. We've all seen the mobile phone user in a crowded public space seemingly oblivious to the people around them. Can the teleworker manage to sufficiently disentangle themselves from the technology to become once again a complete member of the family? Maybe the question is not how does the home office transform back into a home at the end of the working day, but does it really matter that work and home have become so completely entwined that for many people it's impossible to gauge where one ends and the next begins? At this important juncture, we need to understand the nature of human action, the consequences of cross-disciplinary communication and experiences, and the effect that this has upon events and environments. The blurring of boundaries between different activities, subjects, and the level of interaction starting to be developed between specialities means that old ideas of space, form and use are now being questioned. This means that concepts that would have sounded balmy 40 years ago have now become common practice. It is increasingly obvious that the home has evolved to accommodate the lifestyles of the 21st century population. It is no longer a private retreat from which to escape the rigours of the modern world. but a place where the boundary between private and public work and leisure are gradually being eroded. Telecommuting does take advantage of this lack of distinction. It is definitely economically beneficial. For the employee, it saves the money, time and energy that would have been spent travelling. And for the employer, it means that they can save on space, air conditioning, lighting and other costs involved with the running of the office. Another consequence of this need for connection is the almost addictive quality of the work. The employee at home, in the need to prove they are making a valid contribution, may work much longer hours than in the office. There are no colleagues to fall in line with at home time. Neither is there a need to go home for the family and other commitments. It's common for telecommuters to work many more hours than when in the office. This has obvious advantages for the employer, but does it make life easier for the employee? Massive changes in technology have facilitated this, and at the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century, our pluralistic, both-and society is now in a position to understand and take advantages of the consequences of this. The manner in which most people now operate encourages them to actively embrace mobile technology. Wireless systems mean that we are no longer constrained by cables and sockets and big, deep pieces of machinery. This will allow us to further rethink the urban, the working and the domestic environment. Winston Churchill once said, "We shape our buildings and then they shape us." That is, we organise our lives around the design of our environment. Sherry Turkle, in her book We Are Never Alone, takes this concept much further and suggests that, in the future, technology will propose itself as the architecture of our intimacies. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Thomas Forget. I live in New York. I work in architecture and urban planning, and I'm also a teacher of architecture and architectural history at the University of North Carolina. I'm speaking today on a topic that I have just begun to explore. It is essentially a series of questions that are relevant to the themes of the conference. The general topic is the relationship between the scale of the house and the scale of housing, which is something that we've been hearing about in other papers. Since the Renaissance, architects have deployed the villa as an experimental laboratory of spatial theories and social practices. Whereas Palladio's Villa Rotunda reflects the ideas of clarity and order that regulated 16th century Italy, Adolf Loos's Muller House embodies a complexity, perception, and privacy that haunted the early 20th century. So these are houses, but they are also explicit and self-conscious statements about architecture in general. They are, in a sense, text on architecture. More recently, however, the house has become less of a text, as emerging paradigms, both in culture at large and within architectural education and practice, have threatened the traditional role of the house as a primary vehicle of architectural inquiry. Accelerating conditions of climate change, population growth, and communications have rendered the house per se, or what I will call the object house, somewhat of an anachronism in architecture culture. On the one hand, we are faced with critical needs for mass housing that have social and political ramifications. On the other hand, the dream of home ownership has suffered tremendously in the wake of the recent foreclosure crisis. People were told that owning a house was the sign of a complete life, but the buying of houses led many families and individuals to financial ruin. A sign of the diminishing relevance of the object house is a relative lack of house space as opposed to housing-based design studios and academic design programs. At least this is the case in the US. Although the scale of the house is ideal for spatial and tectonic experimentation, it is an economic and cultural model of design and construction that has become questionable. In the 1920s, the bourgeois villa was similarly questionable, but progressive-minded architects used them anyway to promote their social ideas. This is just one of many cases in which architects have taken advantage of wealthy clients in order to critique the power structure. So we've been here before, and much of my interest lies in looking at the 1920s as a precedent of the current era, as something to learn from. The waning significance of object houses has occurred primarily in the last decade. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the house maintained its dominant role as an incubator of ideas whose significance reached beyond its scale, as in the work of OMA, UN Studio, Greg Lynn, and others. Despite the economic crisis, young and progressive firms in particular have recently continued to benefit from the public's perception of architecture as an arbiter of culture, and there has been no lull in the design and construction of theoretically inclined houses. These houses, however, seem to operate differently. Fortunately, many of them still address important issues, such as the Loblolly House by Karen Timberlake Associates, which pertains to sustainability and contemporary models of construction, and the Pittman Dowell Residence by Michael Modson Architecture, which pertains to changing living patterns and models of perception. No house in the past decade, however, has had a seminal impact on the profession in the manner of several 20th century houses, from Villa Savoye to the Slow House. Despite, or perhaps because of the tremendous output of high design houses today, the house no longer seems capable of capturing the theoretical zeitgeist of architecture culture, which now seems to reside in housing projects such as those by Studio Teddy Cruz, Bjork Ingels Group, and others. It is important to recognize both to recognize the increasing importance of a discourse on housing and to understand how it may operate in a theoretical as opposed to a purely functional manner. Given its scale, complexity, and cost, housing may not be able to operate with the theoretical agility of the object house. In a manner unlike the object house, housing must be held responsible for its impact on occupants, context, and budget. Relative to object houses, housing projects may be experimental only to a limited degree. So this is the main question. How can contemporary housing, like the bourgeois villa, be an